I was a young lawyer, just starting out in private practice. I had been a law clerk in the office of Judge Joe Mattina. He called me one day and said that he wanted to send some people over to see me. I said, "What kind of work is this?" He said, "Well, they're going to want to talk to you about an adoption." And I said, "Okay." Joanne Leonhard, who was Tom Leonhard's second wife, her name was Joanne DeVita, that was her maiden name, had a child by a prior relationship, and they wanted to talk about this adoption. I told them what I could do for them. I was happy to do it. It was something that was a great passion of mine. I did a lot of adoptions. One of my 3 children was adopted. All of a sudden, Tom looks at me and he said, "I have 2 other children." I said, "You do?" I said, "You didn't mention that before." He said, "I haven't seen them in years." And I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Because the government took them." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Do you remember Patty Calabrese?" And I knew Patty Calabrese because he was represented by Judge Mattina when he was charged for a robbery of City Hall. He robbed the city treasurer's office. Patty Calabrese was a wannabe gangster. He was not what you would call a made man. He was not a member. He was simply a guy who wanted to be. Well, Calabrese, if you like that kind of a guy, was this West Side dude, and camel hair coats. And when he met Rochelle Calabrese, who had been at the time married to Tom Leonhard, that's when she started clubbing, started going out to various places, and she met Pat Calabrese. He was just 180 degrees the other way from Tom Leonhard. He was not a 9-to-5 guy or a 7-to-5 guy. He was not going to work hard at a job. He wanted the easy money. He was a gambler. He was very exciting to be around. So she was taken by him in more than one way. And they became an item. And at one point, Tom came in and actually found them together in his house. So she takes off with Calabrese, and I say take off. She stayed in the house, and actually it was Tom who had to take off. But he paid his child support. They had a separation agreement. When Calabrese gets busted, Calabrese is wondering what the mob is going to do to take care of his family. It had been pretty much an understanding, an unwritten understanding, that when you were busted on a job for the organized crime gangs of this country, that you would be taken care of. But of course, that was referring to what they called made men, people who were actually members of the mafia. It really was sort of a shady area when it came to people who were not made men. Now, this is about the same time that Joe Valachi is breaking the code of omerta, the code of silence, which for years had governed the conduct of organized criminals, not only in Western New York, but throughout the United States and throughout Italy. That code said that you will settle your differences as men of honor, and that you will have the involvement of your leaders in what is deemed to be appropriate action under the circumstances. Well, Calabrese had this festering thing occurring, and he, as I said, I think at one point he was sort of a chameleon. He could read the tea leaves and would look at what was best for Patty Calabrese. And what was best for Patty Calabrese, it soon became evident, was working with the government. Jim Brown kept saying, "We'll take care of your family." There's this new strike force that's being formed by Bobby Kennedy. The strike force is going to have their very, very first operation in Buffalo, New York. Calabrese is saying, what are you going to do for me? You got to take care of me. These guys are going to want to kill me. And for a time that was true, for a very short time. But Calabrese, being the kind of guy he was, convinced these guys he could give them a lot of information even beyond these particular criminal activities. He gets convicted of the bank robbery at city court, winds up with a felony conviction. He's supposed to go away for 5 years. He goes to Elmira, which at the time was where you went for assignment to other locations. And before you know it, he is in something called WITSEC, the Witness Security Program, which is commonly known throughout the United States as the Witness Protection Program. And what it was intended to be a way to give safe haven to people who turned state's witness against organized crime figures, because the government had a legitimate problem with people being killed or threatened, scared to death into not testifying. They decided that they would relocate these people, but they were thinking mostly in terms of good, honest American people who were caught in a bad situation. As it turned out, it was other criminals who wanted to cut a deal for themselves. Now, many times this did work out for the benefit of the government. The very first person to do that, and with whom they did that, was Pascal Calabrese. And they took him and his family. The only problem was his family wasn't just his family, it was Tom Leonhard's family. They took him in the middle of the night. They came and there was, all the furniture was gone, everything. Tom went the next day to pick up his children for his visit with them. He was taking them to see his mother. And all of a sudden they weren't there anymore. So my goodness sake, he's checking, he thinks, I'll just go to the police. There must be some mistake. They must know what happened. Everybody in the family is, Rochelle's family is saying, well, she's away. I don't know where she is. She'll be gone for a while. That's it. Nobody said goodbye. Nobody said anything. They're gone. Now this guy is scratching his head. He can't believe, he never thinks that his government is involved in a program that's going to keep him separated from his family. He goes to the authorities. He goes to the Buffalo Police Department. He goes to the Erie County Sheriff's Department. He says, where's my children? Where's my family? And they said, we don't know. As time went on, they kept ignoring him and just ignoring him. And finally somebody, I think, took a little pity and said, I don't know, why don't you go ask the feds if they know where he is? So he went. He went first to the FBI, who stonewalled him again. Now months are going by. Months are going by. He's going to lawyers, and he's trying to get lawyers to take his case. Well, first of all, he has no money. And secondly, he has no power. And they're looking at him and they're recognizing, I mean, one lawyer, a very famous lawyer, looked at him and said, Tom, you can't take on City Hall. You can't fight the government. I mean, they're never going to let you see your kids. Forget about them. He said, what are you talking about? Forget about them. They're my children. They're my family. Well, when he told me about this, as I said, he came in to see me about an adoption. And when he told me about this, I said, oh my God in heaven, this is why I went to law school. This case is falling in my lap. There must be some mistake. The government wouldn't just take your kids, Tom. They did. Sal, they took my kids. Well, I'm going to find out what this is all about, and I'm sure there's a misunderstanding, and we're going to get your kids back. Ha ha. He was right. I went to the local authorities who said, Mr. Martoche, come on. You're not going to get anywhere with this. This is bigger than you. This is a major league undertaking by the federal government. The federal government, yes, after months of dealing with local people, I finally and I talked to the FBI. They don't want to say a thing. I talked to the U.S. Attorney's Office. I finally realized that it's the strike force that's involved in this, and I tried talking to Canale, who by this time is back in Washington. There is a case, a big case, in which Paddy Calabrese testifies against these mafioso, and based mainly on his testimony, they are convicted. Well, then they tried to do something impossible. They tried to make him an honest 9-to-5 worker who was going to work at a real job in a relocated situation, where his name would be different, where his identity would be different. His children had to learn another name. His wife had to learn another name. Well, that didn't last because they actually wanted him to show up and go to work. And that was not Paddy Calabrese's style. He didn't want to work. So he had them relocate him. He was a complainer from the very beginning. They relocated him finally, and they gave him another identity. Eventually, Calabrese is telling them, I'm in danger, which by this time he's no longer in danger, because once the conviction took place, the organized crime figures who ran things, Magadino and his associates, wanted the release as early as possible of these key players. Well, they know if anything happens to Calabrese, that completely impedes any opportunity for early release for these people. Well, Calabrese is playing this to the hilt while I am working the system. I'm talking to all these people. I finally get Canale to agree to send letters from Tom to the children. It was never my intention, or even Tom's intention, to break up a program that we felt had some value. It was our intention to humanize that program and to make them aware of the fact that they were abusing their power and taking advantage of an ordinary American in a way that they shouldn't. What is more sacred than a right between a father or a mother and their children? Nothing. And to interfere with that, the government of the United States of America, and then they send him these self-serving letters saying, you're doing this great service to your country, thank you for this. And I'm saying, screw that, you give him your children and take Tom's children and give them back to him. That's what you should do. Anyway, Paddy Calabrese gets relocated. He finally learns enough about how to do this business that he decides he's going to go out on his own. He leaves the witness protection program and he resettles, lo and behold, in Reno, Nevada. Now tell me, does it make sense for somebody who really is fearful of his life to go to Nevada at a time when there's not betting parlors throughout the rest of the United States, where that's the only place that gambling is legal? It doesn't make sense. And it, I think, fits my conjecture that these people were no longer out to harm Paddy Calabrese. The other thing was he kept coming back to Buffalo regularly to see his family and friends. They knew, the people in organized crime knew that he was coming back. If anything, they were going to make sure that nothing happened to him. He didn't get hit by a car or anything else, because, again, they wanted to make sure that nothing interfered with the treatment of, or early release, if possible, of the people that he helped convict. Now, Paddy Calabrese, also being the enterprising snitch that he was, put himself in a position where he would be able to turn this into a lifelong career. While he's in Nevada, he and Rochelle set up a life. She actually was, for a time, a dealer in one of the casinos. Calabrese began working as a private detective. And here, this convicted felon was given the opportunity to continue holding a license for a concealed weapon and was a licensed private investigator. He became a professional informant for the government, a confidential informant. So he would get people and often entrap them. Entrapment is a legal term that means you get somebody to do something illegal that they wouldn't have done had you not drawn them into your scheme. 8 long years after this these children were taken when they were 7 and 8 years of age, respectively. I get a call. It's a July 4th.
And we were at home on Morris Avenue in Buffalo having a party. We were out in the backyard. I know it was summer and we had a lot of people around. And the phone rang. And of course, I didn't have a phone in my pocket then. I had to run inside and answer the phone that was hanging on the kitchen wall. And I picked up the phone and hello, and this voice said, "Is this the Martoche residence?" I said, "Yes, who's calling?" And she said, "This is Roe." I said, she said, "This is Roe, I'm calling for Sal Martoche." Now, he was a lawyer in private practice. He got phone calls at home. I tried to at least be able to give him a first and a last name of whoever was calling him. And so I said, "May I tell him who's calling?" She said, "Well, this is Rochelle Calabrese." Well, that rang a bell because we'd been living with this case and with these names for years. Rochelle Calabrese, Patty Calabrese, Tom and Joanne Leonhard, all those names were like front and center. So I said, "Well, just a minute, please." I put the phone down, I went out into the backyard and I said, "You're not gonna believe who's on the phone."
She says, "Somebody's on the phone to speak to you." I said, "Who?" She said, "You're not gonna believe this, Rochelle." I said, "Rochelle who?"
I said, "It's Rochelle Calabrese."
Rochelle Leonhard. I couldn't believe it.
And he looked at me like I was, had temporarily lost my mind, went into the kitchen, picked up the phone. Sure enough, I didn't hear this end of it, but apparently she said, "Sal, this is Roe." Like they'd run into each other at the grocery store yesterday,
friends.
And that was the beginning of Tom's opportunity after all those years to reunite with his children.
And she says, "I made a terrible mistake." Now, she had written these letters, these terrible letters telling Tom he would never see his children. At every turn, she tried to stop us. When we went into court and we got a change of custody order, and I said, "Hey, if indeed, as they say that Calabrese is in danger, doesn't that mean that the people in his household are in danger? And doesn't that mean that my client's children are in danger? Why should they be living with that mother who's in that situation voluntarily? They're not there voluntarily." She thwarted that. I got a bill, a private bill introduced, a bill for money damages for $1 million unless they produced his children. I want you to know, too, that Tom and I suggested, just to show you how reasonable we were being, we would see the children at a neutral site 4 times a year at Tom's expense. And they wouldn't go for it because Patty and Rochelle wouldn't go for it. Rochelle, when she wrote a letter which finally put an end to receiving correspondence from Tom, actually misspelled his name in the letter to him. I can't believe that it was accidental. I think it was another way for her to show her disdain for him. Some of the days were hard, and some of the hard days revolved around the story and the time it took, and frankly, the economic cost of it. And as I said, I had a lot of help. I had a great partner who understood that what we were doing was important. It was still a sacrifice at home.
Well, it was definitely not a moneymaker, but he wasn't, I think you always knew that it wasn't going to be a moneymaker, but it was something that needed to be done. It was the right thing to do.
I'm so glad I did it, and I feel like it certainly is one of the highlights of my life, one of my privileges. 8 years. To me, it's unfathomable. It's so hard for me even today to not get emotional, but I get so angry. You can't take advantage of a poor guy, a blue-collar guy like Tom Leonhard. You can't just say he's expendable. You can't say that his rights don't matter. I have letters from people in the Justice Department saying things like, Mr. Leonhard, you've made a great sacrifice for your country, and we thank you for that. Nobody asked Tom if they could take his children. They simply took them in the dead of night, and this guy, this poor, ordinary, average, beer-drinking, tax-paying, decent American, he has his relationship ruptured forever with his children. 8 years he struggled to find his family. 8 years. You know, Tom has passed away. I've talked to his daughter, Gina, a few times since then. She's really a credit to the two of them. She's a lovely woman, and raising some children of her own. And through her, I've sort of kept my connection with Tom and Joanne.